high atop the pastoral center of the Diocese of Camden, you're listening to Talking Catholic.
Hi everyone, this is Mary McCusker, your co-host for Talking Catholic, and we're recording this through Zoom. I'm joined by Mike Walsh, who I actually just called in a panic about half an hour ago, saying, I don't know anything about the topics we're going to be discussing today, and I don't know what they have to do with each other. And then Mike replied with, that's okay, neither do I. So I don't know if that was supposed to be comforting, Mike, or if that is just a bad sign for us.
No. That is a sign of what this podcast is supposed to be. So I went out, I started in this career as a journalist. Yeah, how many times I've worked into doing interviews with people knowing almost nothing about what's going on, particularly if it's a breaking news story. My philosophy with this podcast has always been it's an opportunity to highlight people in and around the Diocese of Camden and discuss things that probably don't get the level of spotlight that they deserve. And the conversation we're going to have today is something that, I'll be honest with you, I didn't really focus on until I was married. I was married, I don't know if I was married late or early. I was married when I was 27. But I didn't have a child until I was 37. And we didn't really nail down some of these long-term life questions, particularly end-of-life questions, until my son came around, which was probably, as I would suggest that the experts might say, that was probably a little late, although probably completely normal for a lot of folks that they don't start thinking about this stuff until they have something to worry about. Now, you being the young 28 years old that you are, probably haven't had to focus on this stuff yet because it just hasn't been that point. But the truth of the matter is there really is no time like the present, and you can't really start focusing on these things soon enough. I remember when I got my first job, the thing people kept reminding me was, make sure you got your 401k figured out early on, because figuring it out early on makes life so much easier later in life. Plus, you earn so much more money for your retirement.
You sound like my dad right now, Mike. I don't like that. 401k, plan ahead. But all these topics are important, and it's interesting how Catholicism ties into them as well.
Right. That's a good point. And this is actually, we're going to be talking about things today that I'm not sure that people would necessarily think about the, spiritual or faith connection, but it really is something that's actually very much tied into our faith. And we actually are going to have three of our Catholic leaders from South Jersey in their very respective worlds kind of talk about this, and hopefully people will get a better idea of it. And honestly, it's something that at any age of life, so all of our listeners really should take an interest in this conversation. So and since we're sort of dancing around it, the focus of the theme of this podcast is going to be on estate planning. Something that you should be doing in your daily life, as well as something you're going to look towards the future on. So we brought in three experts who are far smarter than Mary and I in this area. First, we have Marianne Gilbride, who's the director of the Office of Development for the Diocese of Camden. Marianne, good to see you.
Good to see you.
All righty. We also have Deacon Jerry Jablanowski, who is the executive director of Vitality Catholic Healthcare Services, which we've touched on a couple of times on the podcast, but we haven't had Deacon Jerry on in probably a couple of years now. So thanks for coming back.
Oh, great. Great to see you, Mike. Good to be here.
Good, you as well. And we also have Pat McGrory, who is someone I've had the benefit of working with a couple of different times in the diocese of my role as a director of communications. And I found him to be a sage in terms of his knowledge of finance, and someone who I've actually found to be quite a calming influence when we've had some more high-tech things to have to deal with. So he is a local financial advisor in the city of Vineland. He is also the vice chair of the Diocesan Finance Council, and he is a member of the Reichskog Foundation for Catholic Activities. Pat, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for that. It's great to be with you.
Sure. So I think to open up the podcast today, I really want to talk to Marianne about the estate planning. This is something that Marianne, kind of works with a lot in her role of, our chief financial development person for the Diocese of Camden. So, Marianne, can you give us our listeners an idea what estate planning is?
Yeah, sometimes that idea and that word estate kind of throws people off, but it's really a way that a person can handle their end of life issues while they're still alive. They can make some directives. They can create a will. They can decide to make some planned gifts so that people in their lives and ministries and things that they have a personal connection to can be provided for when they are no longer with us. So that estate planning can start with an advance directive of your health choices, should you be unable to make those choices at some point towards the end of your life, or even if you were just very seriously ill, you can assign someone to take care of those issues. It can involve taking care of your parents, your children, your loved ones with certain financial type gifts. You can name a guardian for your children. You can name someone to be in charge of your affairs when that time comes. So there's a lot involved in it, and it all centers and continues around the idea of stewardship, giving back from the gifts that I've been blessed with. And now when I get to that point where I can't take it with me, how am I going to steward those wonderful gifts?
Now, Deacon Jerry, I have to imagine this is a world you've interacted with probably a lot. Certainly as our executive director of Vitality, you work with a lot of people who are in situations that may have, a terminal end. But you were also the CEO of a hospital for many years as well. So is this something you find that people are usually prepared for or unprepared for as they're kind of reaching these milestones in their life?
Well, I'll tell you this. One of the things that we really have to always consider as we look at all phases of living and dying in the work that we do for Vitality. But it was when I come looking back also, though, at the time at the hospital, and that spans a pretty long time, I would say that maybe 20 years ago, many people were very unprepared. And the idea of advanced directives were something that very few would have when they came into the hospital. And it would cause a lot of problems. It would cause a lot of issues between doctors and family members and people trying to make decisions for that person. But over the past 20 years, I'd say we've seen I think even with information sessions like this and others throughout, more and more people are very aware of what advanced directives are and the need for them. I think we've seen a generation of people making decisions for their parents and say, I don't want that to happen again. Mom or dad, get these decisions down now so that I don't have to make them later on. Because that's one of the things that we can talk about a little later as, why we need advanced directives is really, it's a heavy burden to put on a family member to make these types of end-of-life decisions for a loved one. And if one has that documented, one's very clear in understanding what their wishes are, that makes life and dying a lot easier for that individual and for the family of survivors so that they can understand that no decisions were made that were against the will of the person who has been facing these problems, these decisions. And it's also a way today, we're very aware of it, again, within our faith. It's a way to stay consistent with our Catholic beliefs at the issues of death and dying so that we're not going contra to any church teaching when it comes to an understanding of, as we like to say, avoiding the two extremes. The extreme we have is one that's getting a lot of attention these days, and that's the issue of assisted suicide, for example, which the church is certainly opposed to. We're all opposed to that morally because we're not the owners of death. God is the owner of death. We're the stewards of our life, and we have to respect that. And then the other extreme is that people don't understand is we're not expected to go through undue burden and undue pain also as a result of the death and dying process, that there are ways that we can manage that and that we don't have to undergo these artificial, extraordinary means to preserve life when life has already been in a way that the prognosis is zero, that life has already been ending, if you will, in the way that one is progressing. So the advanced directives have become a lot more popular. Hospitals are sort of mandating them. I think one of the first questions they ask you anymore when you come in is, do you have an advanced directive? That's one of the first questions, usually before how you doing, because it is an important part of the treatment process that is going on. And many states have mandated that through different forms that need to be filled out by the doctor as soon as you come in that pertain to end of life situations from a legal perspective as well, so that they don't make decisions that they could be later on held liable for going against your will. So there's a lot to them. And, I hope in the course of our discussions here today, we can kind of talk a little bit about the specifics of them.
So, with that in mind, I kind of want to turn to you, Pat. I think most people, when they think of, how their time on this earth will end and making sure things are prepared, think of something as simple as a will, right? And not suggesting that's a simple thing, but it's a simple word that people have an easy way of grasping. But I have to imagine that this, estate planning and the planning that people will put into their final years is actually more intricate than just a simple will. Would I be right?
Yeah, you'd be certainly right there. And, I'd even expand it to say estate planning is a lifelong event because even as a younger person, especially if you have children, the estate planning components of that tie in with who would raise your children if you were to pass away, who would manage the finances for your children, if you were to pass away. And it also includes the aspects of charitable giving, again, which is really a lifelong, process to embark on, especially as you start to accumulate assets. Then the estate planning process can become, more complex, not just with the wills, but also beneficiary designations. You mentioned the 401k earlier. Mm-hmm. So various retirement accounts, various insurance policies that you may have. And a lot of people get those policies or 401ks right from when they start working. So beneficiary designations is often something that people are faced with deciding what to do with, and they may not even really understand, what that entails. So the estate planning really is a lifelong process, especially once you start to accumulate assets. Obviously all the way, through and even beyond when you pass away, because your estate in many cases will exist beyond your death, whether that's only for a short period of time, maybe about a year, or whether there's various trusts that may actually exist in perpetuity. So it is a pretty complex process there.
Patrick, I'm curious, when I hear these things about end of life and assets, I'm pushing 30, I'm 28. So, I'm kind of thinking, I don't have too much to my name. I have a dog. That's very important. I don't have kids though. So what's, the average age, you work as a financial advisor. I'm just curious what's kind of the ages that people come to you to try to make some of these plans.
Yeah, that's a great question. We work with people of all ages. So someone like yourself, is really working on accumulating assets. People who are certainly planning for bigger purchases like homes or vacation homes. Certainly grandparents, as they're embarking on retirement or in retirement, all the way through, retirement itself. So we'll even have grandchildren as clients, of families. So, financial planning, much like estate planning, really involves everyone. And it's about, your financial goals as a person, whether that's just to take care of your dog for now or whether that's...
It's a big priority.
It's a big priority. I have a little puppy myself, so she's in my estate plan, believe it or not. Somebody's got to take care of her.
And that's a good point. I mean, this kind of harkens back to something you said earlier, that it's a lifetime commitment, because the truth of the matter is it is something. I mean, you should start it early on, in those early stages, but then you really need to make sure you're keeping up with it like every couple of years, right?
It is one of the biggest components to estate planning are the tax laws. And they've been changed dramatically over the past, 10 to 15 years. And as we know in the press, there's anticipated another tax law, and a component of that most likely will be estate planning taxes, even as it may apply to some state inheritance taxes. So it's not just one and done in terms of, doing a will and forgetting about it. The other component is your life events change. Maybe it's a dog now, maybe it's a child in a couple of years, and maybe it's 2 or 3 children, 5 or 10 years. Maybe it's one property, maybe it's multiple properties. Different insurances you might have change over time. So it really is something that the more proactive you are in managing the accumulation of assets and then the estate planning itself, the more opportunity you'll have to establish a legacy, not just for yourself and your family, but maybe for the institutions that you were involved in or, give credit to during your life as well.
Now, I will say I have the benefit, and I encourage everyone to do this. If you get a chance, marry an accountant. Now, I married one, and she has been hamstringing me for 21 years now, telling me that, Mike, so much of this money is going to go to charity, so much of our money is going to go to this, and then so much of our money has to go to our retirement. And she routinely likes to tell me how much money we've gained and lost with our 401ks and on my Roth IRAs and everything that we have. It's a great experience to constantly be reminded by your wife that you have no money, because I'm sure I'm paid every week, but we have no money.
This is a pattern of, women handling all of this stuff and, nudging their husbands and
hey, listen,
Mike, you have someone handling all this complex stuff for you.
I do, trust me. And I would say I get it for free, although I also know I get yelled at a lot, so I'm not sure that's free. But the truth of the matter is, what she's shown me over those 21 years is it really is a commitment. You really have to. I think a lot of people get into trouble, particularly as they get older, much older, because they didn't set these things up when they were younger, and they may find themselves in their later years either being unable in terms of being able to afford things in retirement, or being able to, like you were saying, Pat, support entities that they would like to support as they get older. And the only way to do that is to actually do it while you're younger. So I'm curious, in terms of reaching out to people, like how can we encourage people to start looking into their financial health at a younger age, or reminding them as they get older?
It's a great question. And I just looked up the statistic. The average retirement account for a 60-year-old is less than $200,000.
Wow.
Now, $200,000 may seem like a lot of money to some people, but in retirement, that may last, call it 3 years. And the average life expectancy for a couple, statistically, one of those two people will live into their 90s.
Wow.
So what we try to do with people, our society is sort of against us, because to some degree we're in a consumer-based society where we get, blasted with messages to buy things, not save money. But if you can really see the power of saving a little bit every month and what that can afford you, which is comfort, security, housing, let alone other goals like education, being able to, afford some of the luxuries of life. Like you said earlier, the saving a little bit early often will often accumulate much more than if you were to save a lot later. And so just trying to get people to see the power of that savings can really dramatically help, almost even to some extent to visualize what that house or vacation home may look like. As silly as putting up a dream board or a picture on your wall, that really can help encourage people. You'll notice too, some of the legislation around retirement planning is they actually now, the government allows companies to force their employees to enroll into the retirement plan. It actually is not voluntary anymore if a company chooses for it to be that way. And that's because to some degree, even the government recognizes the importance of saving, especially at an early age. So while society's sort of getting us to try and buy stuff all the time, to some degree, there are other forces trying to force us to save.
And I see that all the time here at Catholic Charities. A lot of clients who come in have said, I never thought I would end up at a charity. But the reality is so many people are just one financial crisis, one accident, away from, needing assistance. And I think a lot of people might underestimate that. So I'm curious, Deacon Jerry, this might be switching gears a little bit, but it's still tied into this general topic. Can you tell us a little bit about some of this jargon I'm hearing? Living wills, advanced directives, power of attorney. Can you kind of give us a crash course in that? And I'm sorry to our listeners who already know this, but I'm not too well versed in this.
Well, yeah, I'd be happy just real quickly to kind of run through some of that. I think there is certainly a lot of jargon out there that people have to kind of get to understand, but they're all basically ways for us to create a documentation of our wishes of how we want to be treated medically at end of life. That's really what these all happen to come down to. As I said before, we want those decisions already made so that they're not a burden on others. The living will is a real popular term. It's kind of a very wide and encompassing term. It is a type of advanced directive because one typically in a living will would spell out how they want to be treated. One of the limitations of that, though, is they're usually looked at as answering the yes/no question. Do I want medical technology to keep me alive, or do I not want medical technology to keep me alive? And they sometimes don't cover all of the specifics that could occur as a result now of advancing technologies and the end of life decisions that need to be made. But they are legally binding documents that do spell out that desire for one. But again, they have their own limitations in that case. There's then the actual, we call the advanced directive, which in itself is the document that most people will point to. And as I said before, it's kind of written in advance of an illness or injury. It's not something that you want to have to immediately write when you enter the hospital in a critical situation. It's written well ahead of time, particularly if you're in an age-related decline. You want to be sure that those decisions are already spelled out when you are of sound health, mind and body. And they cover very specific circumstances. Many times they include a broad range of issues that address many of the medical scenarios that could occur as one approaches death. But they're really your wishes on withholding extraordinary means of medical treatment to keep you alive, or if they only prolong your dying. We're not expected to have our dying prolonged. If it's already preordained that we are going to die of a certain illness, and such is the prognosis, then the advanced directive is that document that's done. They are also, I think, one of the things that people need to recognize too in advanced directives is there are specific Catholic advanced directives. And I think that's something that we oftentimes have to get across to our Catholic clients, particularly when we're speaking with them about these, is because some people have a hesitancy to even think, well, that's not my decision. It's God's decision what's going to happen. And we have to be sure to understand that God wants us to make those decisions as well when it comes to how we're going to be treated in the ordinary fashion. So they're written in these Catholic advanced directives are written in ways that keep us in line with Catholic moral teaching. And they're certainly highly recommended by the church for many of the reasons I've already spelled out. But again, if we can get into that a little bit later, but there are certainly a lot of benefits to it, and the Catholic one keeps us in line with our faith. The other thing we hear is this medical power of attorney, or durable power of medical attorney for healthcare. That means you have to designate a person who could be your surrogate, your spokesperson for you when you are not able to make your own decisions because of your state of health or consciousness, that you can't make those decisions. And that's a person that you name in your advance directive as someone who would be that for you. Many times you name a primary, a secondary, and sometimes even a tertiary, because that first person may not be available or may predecease you, whatever the case may be. You have to, again, keep that in mind. But again, this should be a person you speak to a lot and let you know your wishes, because they'll use the advance directive as a guideline. But as you know, we can't document every scenario in life. Things are going to happen. They're going to have to understand what your thinking is and what you would decide without that document. So it's someone you absolutely trust, and that becomes your medical power of attorney. You'll hear that.
And can these things be changed, or is it carved in stone?
No, you can change them anytime you want. What's important about the changes is that when you do change them, one of the things I should say is that when you do write an advance directive, it has to be signed and should be notarized. It doesn't need a lawyer, but you do need to have it notarized so that that signature is valid when one would look at that in and of itself. But you can change it anytime you want, because life situations may change, your opinions may change, your thought process could change, and the person who you want maybe as your power of attorney would change over time as well. There's a lot of times people say, don't choose someone as your power of attorney who has something to gain from your death, because that could be a conflict at times, But I always just say it has to be someone you totally trust, because that's really what it comes down to, totally trust them. But yeah, it could change. And then you'd have your new one written, again, signed, notarized, distributed to your family so that they understand what the latest version is that you go through. And the other word we hear a lot is DNR. You ever hear those words in the jargon? Sure. Do not resuscitate. That becomes another one that we hear. But again, and they are certainly things that are spelled out in the advance directive. And it's perfectly acceptable to say that in my medical terminal condition that I know there's going to be no advantage to having my heart resuscitated, that I can expect not to be resuscitated and put a DNR order on my chart or in my kitchen if the paramedics show up, to know that I am not one who wants to have artificial respiration started and resuscitated, that when my heart stops in the condition that I'm in, knowing, let's say I'm either a terminal cancer patient or just some terminal disease that I've already been given that diagnosis, I don't want to go through the burden and pain of resuscitation, that's the signal from God that my life has come to an end and I'm returning home at that point. So, the DNR is also a very acceptable part of the dying process for many people. It wouldn't be for a young person. Let's say if a young person is otherwise healthy and has a heart attack, you don't want a DNR order, because you know that with the resuscitation, you could come back to a normal, perfect life and live 30, 40, 50, 60 more years after that. So the DNR would only be appropriate in a very unique situation of a poor prognosis. So there's a lot of words out there. We just need to kind of be sure we understand what they mean. And we also have to understand what I believe for us, what the position of the Catholic Church is on these things, so that we're consistent. And we don't get into that gray area where people start worrying about all these decisions. They're very clear cut. We understand what they need to be. And we have a lot of resources that we can share that help spell that out for people.
And Deacon Jerry, I have to imagine you have sort of a unique perspective on this, not just because of your professional background, but also as your life as a deacon. I mean, these things that you were talking about, they're something that usually takes a great deal of discernment, and you really, and I could see people being very troubled by them, as they're trying to make it, particularly, I'm sure, young people who have a terminal illness, but certainly older folks as well. How do you walk someone through that process of making that kind of a decision?
Well, I'll tell you what, one of the things you have to be able to do is understand who they are, where they're coming from, and what their condition is. So once you know what that condition is, I think the best way is to explain the issues of, what medical technologies are there, so they understand what the process could be, or they could expect, but also explain to them what we talk about as the teachings of the church, the moral teachings of the church, to fully understand the fact of what death is all about. Death is part of life, and people have to understand the continuum. And we don't fight death completely. There's times that death is natural and it should occur naturally. And we want to make sure they understand the difference between what would be considered a burden, an undue burden on them, undue pain that they don't need to experience. There's this unbelievable sometimes, and I understand where it comes from, this Catholic notion that, oh, I must undergo pain. It's all part of life. I have to have this extreme pain in order for to be sharing the suffering of Christ. We hear that a lot. Well, Christ doesn't ask us to suffer. There's sometimes we have to suffer for him, but he doesn't ask us to do that. And it's not required. It's not mandatory. It's not one of the boxes that needs to be checked before we get into heaven. We do have ways that the church helps promote an understanding of the issues of, for example, if a diagnosis is terminal, you don't need to undergo all these extraordinary measures. You can have hospice care, palliative care, as we call it, to relieve the pain and suffering of dying and die naturally without all the other machines going and all the extraordinary chemicals through chemo or whatever else they're doing that could be part of a natural death process. It does take time to walk a person through that. It takes a lot of time for them to finally come to that understanding that it's very acceptable to say no to extraordinary means, that we're not designed to just cling to life no matter what cost. God created technologies for us today that allow us to live beyond natural means. Science has advanced tremendously in a lot of ways, but that doesn't mean we're all subject to its effects. We have to be able to decide what's right for us and what's not right. And it is an individual decision. There's a lot of individuality in terms of circumstances that go into it. We oftentimes accompany the whole family through that process, not just the individual. It's the whole family discussion. It's one of the things our chaplains get involved with quite a bit in our hospitals. It's one of the top issues of discussions with families, is that whole issue of when to make decisions on what treatments are required, not required, when to withhold, when to accept. It is a very, very difficult process for people to undergo, but it's very rewarding once the family and that patient make those decisions, because then they know it is in God's hands in a way that they can still die with dignity, die without excruciating pain if their condition is such that it would lead to pain, and that they're certainly following all the moral obligations of the church. Because advanced directives oftentimes include things like, I want to be able to have a priest, I want to have sacraments, I want a Catholic funeral, I may want to be buried in a Catholic cemetery, whatever their other issues are, can all be included in that advanced directive for them as well.
That's.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, hearing you talk about that, oftentimes we think of end of life decisions as being solemn and sorrowful, and I've been blessed to be a part of some end of life decisions where it ended up being actually quite joyful and peaceful, and it actually became more. Mary is now looking at me with cross-eyed, but these were. But and I mean this for both young families that have gone through tragedy as well as some older folks, where it gave them an opportunity to for closure, B, to really include the extended family and the things that person loved most in their life was all because they spent the time to actually think about it. And this was a scenario where these things were possible, where it was a somewhat long-term case, not someone dying suddenly in a car crash or something like that, of course. But it ended up being a really wonderful opportunity. So I would hope that people wouldn't be. I think everybody naturally is frightened of these things, but I hope they wouldn't be too frightened of it.
But one of the big things is that when you do that, the decisions are made that death can be done peacefully. Death can happen with the family being so involved, and not in the turmoil of decisions, but more in really with that person, being accompanying them through death, being accepting of death, and in the long term, really understanding that their spiritual life is now beginning in a new realm, and they can spend that time, quality time with family. That's the glory of hospice. It's not there to get into the medical complexities. It's really there to help that individual in their whole spiritual life, the life of the family, the unity of the family, and how they all come together in a happy death. They sound contradictory sometimes, when we say that.
Yeah.
But I think advanced directives lead us into that happy death.
So,
Deacon Jerry, you mentioned, sorry, Mike, we start asking questions at the same time.
You go first, Mary.
I wanted to ask Marianne, I know it's been brought up a couple of times that it's not just the person who's making these decisions, but their family as well. So, I'm curious, from a gifts standpoint, if that's the right word for it, how does family tie into this beyond just the individual when it comes to planning out where gifts go, where assets go?
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, as Deacon Jerry was saying, the advanced directive is one great start to getting the family involved. As much as many people don't like to think about having to plan for it, like Mike said in his experience, it really is such a blessing when you have the opportunity to make those choices with your family. And the first time my husband and I got involved in that advanced directive piece personally was when we both were remarried. And so we went and had our wills redone. And at that time, without us even asking, the attorney provided us with an advanced directive. And we're reading through it. And I was like, no, this is not, because it was very general. I do not want a DNR. I do not want this. But what are the circumstances? And so because of my experience in development, I knew that there were other kinds of advanced directives. And that made me think, you know what, we need to get this out there. We need to be sure that other people know that as well. So we're starting to share it with pastors. We've got it online so people can click at it at their leisure and see what's involved in a Catholic perspective advanced directive, so that my children or my person that I'm designating as my caretaker in these events doesn't have to worry about making those decisions. They'll know exactly what I want. And then as far as the financial pieces are concerned, allowing yourself to have conversations with your children if you so desire, or to think about what would I like to leave to my children in the way of gifts. If I have a special stamp collection that I know my son Bobby would love to have, I don't want that sold at the end of my life and cashed out to be split evenly between my children. So I have the opportunity in my estate plan to perhaps assign certain things to go to certain people, or I can make a decision to have things cashed out, sold, and shared. I can make percentages to each person. I can give a percentage of the overall leftovers to my charity, my church, the House of Charity. There are so many opportunities, so many different types of gifts, and being able to think about those ahead of time is just really a blessing for the family, because they're not agonizing over these choices.
And that's actually something I was going to ask you about. Is, we were talking to Deacon Jerry about, those end of life decisions from a terminal standpoint and a family standpoint. Determining your bequests can also be a rather joyous experience as well. Now, I have to imagine, Marianne, you're probably contacted with some frequency about people who want to consider the church or one of our parishes or the diocese or one of our schools or one of our ministries or Catholic charities in their wills or whatever they're creating, whatever their estate plan is. So if someone reaches out to you, like what's the first, like, I have this money, I want to do something with it before I die. How do you have a conversation with them about that?
So those conversations really try to be holistic. What family members do you have? What volunteer activities did you do? What ministries did you serve in? What is your church? So you have those conversations so that the person that you're speaking with has those memories come back again and say, I loved this parish. I was baptized here and I was received my sacraments here. I got married here. I moved back into town, raised my children here. And unfortunately, what can happen a lot is all those connections are made with the parish, and then the person dies and leaves all their money to their college because their college asked. And so it's important for us as church, as ministry, to help remind our parishioners, our donors, our volunteers, our ministry servers that you can also leave a part of your estate to your church, parish ministry, et cetera.
And what you described, Marianne and Patrick, you might know something about this too. I'm sure you do. But when it comes to planned gifts, I'm sure that a lot of things fall under that umbrella. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Patrick, do you want to jump on that?
Sorry, I should have specified.
Sure, no, it's okay.
Yeah, I would pick up off what Marianne was just saying too. It's really interesting to look at obituaries, and it's a great testament to the people's lives. And in an obituary, you often see everything that they did, certainly the family that they loved, often the parish that they were a part of, and the civic organizations that they might have loved. And then you'll see all donations go to, and often it's what they passed away from. The American Cancer Society or, the Heart Association, which are wonderful organizations. But you'll see a life lived with family, with organizations. And often that is a result of a lack of planning. Because the family's sort of faced with writing the obituary, and they say, well, let's just give it to this organization because it's what he passed away from or what she ultimately succumbed to. What plain giving allows you to do is celebrate the life that you've lived, both while you're living and after you pass away. And that could be something as simple as earmarking a gift for your parish, your grade school, maybe it's your high school. It could be earmarking it towards general Catholic charities for the good of the diocese, for the bishop to determine, what the best needs may be. But what plain giving allows you to do through a number of different vehicles, including trusts and things like that, it really allows you to celebrate your life through planning out what those gifts are, both while you're living and then ultimately when you pass away and even beyond.
And then those different types of gifts that you can make can help you while you're alive and can help your family after. Certainly gifts of cash or immediate donations, immediate tax deductions, things like that. Gifts of securities can, if they've appreciated over the years, giving the gift of those securities directly to a charity can help tremendously with the tax benefits to the donor. And then there's like real estate gifts, life insurance gifts, bargain sales, charitable gift annuities. I know a guy who has over 135 charitable gift annuities. When he was, he received an inheritance from his parents when they passed away. And when he was meeting with his attorney to kind of get all his affairs in order and putting the money, where he needed it, the attorney said to him, so when are you going to start giving some of this away? And he said, it was like a light bulb went off for me. And I just started to research, who can I help? Who can I help now? And those charitable gift annuities became his vehicle to help ministries now while providing a source of income to him at the same time while he's still alive.
You were going to say something?
Yeah, Marianne, you bring up a great point. We often will talk to people about the IRA, the qualified charitable donation, and so many people never have even heard of it, and it is often like a light bulb. So the quick example of how that works is if you accumulate 401k assets, throughout your life, and you put them into an IRA, once you reach the age Now at 72, so once you reach the age of 72, you're forced to take a certain amount of money out of that every year, whether you need it or not. And the money that you take out is taxed as income on your tax return. So let's say you need to take out $10,000 a year out of your IRA. Again, that's $10,000 a year of tax. Many people, because of the standard deduction that has been increased, they cannot deduct that $10,000 as charitable contributions because they don't cross the threshold. You can actually make a charitable donation directly out of your IRA up to $100,000 a year. And that income goes directly from your IRA to the church, to the charity, and there's no taxes paid on it. So if you were to tell your pastor that, hey, I'm not going to give you an envelope every week, I'm going to give you one check a year, and that check is for my annual contribution. Believe me when I tell you, they won't mind. Because that week that you're at the shore and not at church, they're still going to get your envelope because it came in one check. But that's a wonderful example of avoiding taxes, all the while, allowing the charity to receive, that check tax free.
Is that only after you're 72? Did you say that?
Correct.
Okay.
It's what meets you can do it before, but it's what meets the required amount that you're supposed to take out. And that's where it usually comes in, is if you don't need the money, you can just let it sit there. But you can certainly do it, before as well.
It's funny you bring this up. I actually know someone who just this year, just not 2 months ago, did that exact same thing. And they're an older couple, and I was gobsmacked when they told me that story. However, they made the same decision. They made the decision to support a Catholic entity as that was how they decided to use the money. And I thought that was brilliant. I was like, that's so generous of them. I was so excited. I told them thank you myself, and I'm not even part of the entity they're giving it to. I'm just so happy that they made that decision. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
We have a number of people who do that for their annual appeal gift. Some of them are paying their Catholic Strong pledge to the Capital Campaign through their RMD, required minimum distribution. So they are, our donors are really getting savvy, and spreading the word too. That one guy who has all these charitable gift annuities also does his IRA distribution one time a year to his church. And this guy carries around cards that talk about, you got to make a charitable gift annuity. You're going to get income from it. Plus, it's going to help your charity. You got to do this. So he really pushes it.
You got to get him to volunteer for you just to go out and spread the word.
He's the man. We had him come and speak at the International Catholic Stewardship Conference one year. But because he just has so much experience and has done split charitable gift annuities, he's given them to his church. He has some with us through to Catholic charities. So he gets these checks all throughout the year.
Wow. I love that. We have about 5 minutes left of the podcast. So Mary, did you have something you wanted to ask?
I did, and it just left my brain. I can't remember which.
Mary, I just want to bring up one thing maybe someone can comment on. One of the areas where we see the intersection of finances and aging in our Vitality service is when people need to go into long-term care. And what happens is if they haven't planned appropriately, many times all those assets are now going to be totally absorbed into the cost of their long-term care before they can become qualified for Medicaid. I was just wondering, I don't know if Patrick or Marianne want to comment a little bit on that planning process that can help seniors deeper into their aging preserve some of those assets so they can be later on used for other charitable purposes as opposed to being disposed of immediately into the cost of long-term care.
Yeah, there's actually, and Patrick, I'm sure, can speak to this better than I can. There are long-term insurance policies that you can sign up for and make payments on that can help with that. Patrick?
Yeah, I would quickly say a couple of things. One, certainly there's long-term care insurances, and they provide income, when you need the expenses for that item. The other couple comments that I'd make is there are certain look back, they call them look back periods, which is where if you're trying to sort of gift away your assets, maybe you're trying to get below a threshold to get Medicaid, that there's a 2-year and a 5-year look back period. So you really have to be careful. And it does require a lot of planning and a lot of trust of your family members, because if you are giving up those assets, the IRS can actually, look back again 2 or 5 years, depending on the situation, and, not allow you to get benefits that you might otherwise have been able to receive. And what I would also say is, especially if you are facing that situation, it really is important to involve a variety of people to make that decision. So whether that's a child, whether that's a partner, whether that's another family member, it could even be someone like a priest or a trusted fellow parishioner, because if you're in a vulnerable situation, the more trusted people that you have around yourself to make that decision, that will really go a long way and bring about a certain level of comfort, so that the last thing I'd say is, get 2 or 3 opinions too, because again, just because one advisor, lawyer, accountant tells you to, obviously with the exception of Mike's wife, if an accountant or an attorney tells you to do something and you're not sure of it, get a second opinion, because some of these decisions can be irrevocable. So never hesitate to bring people to the table when you're talking about these topics.
Yeah, and the truth of the matter is, as Pat, as you are well aware, these are some rather esoteric issues, financial issues, and the laws change constantly. So you really do need to bring in an expert. I happen to be married to one, which is helpful, but it comes with different costs. But I haven't bought new camera equipment in years, and I've never been able once to depreciate any of it. Drives me up a wall. But the benefit of bringing in an expert is that you won't run into those mistakes down the line, because the worst case scenario is making a decision that ends up making life more difficult for you down the line. And you also don't want to go the other route, which is, cashing out your checks and sticking them in your mattress. That's probably about the worst decision you can possibly make. Aside from the fact you never know when it might be stolen. And second of all, there are certainly better ways of handling your money than just burying them in the backyard. I'm going to assume that's true, Marianne. I'm not wrong, right?
Yeah, you want to, for legal things, check with your attorney or your financial advisor, get their advice in, am I doing the right thing here? And as Patrick said, trusted people that you surround yourself with.
So where can people learn more? I have a link written down, CamdenGiftLegacy.org. Is that
right?
Where people can go?
Yeah. You can get a host of information, videos, snippets, forms right on that website about planned giving. If you go to the CamdenDiocese.org, the development page, there's a link there to print out that advanced directive that the bishops put together. Don't be alarmed if you see October 2011. That is the most revised version.
Yeah,
so I thought this podcast would be all doom and gloom and like really morbid, but it's actually been really educational and helpful, and there's some joy involved to all of this. Yeah,
isn't it great? So that means you're going to go out and find a financial advisor right away, Mary, right? As the young person on the call, right?
Maybe tomorrow. Today is not the day.
To tomorrow, what you can do today. But someone's got, hey, listen, who knows? You're going to get hit by a bus. Someone's got to take care of Ollie. So, hey, someone's got to take care of Jack. It's the same deal. Anyway, well, thank all of you for being a part of this. We really appreciate it. The stuff we learned today was incredibly educational and very useful. So thank you for that. Mary, thank you for being my co-host. And to our listeners, thank you for listening. And we'll get back to you again next week. See you, everybody.